Well, good evening, good afternoon. We're very privileged to have a Lieutenant General retired Jack Shanahan, who's had an extraordinary career in the Air Force and was most recently the inaugural director of the new Joint Artificial Intelligence Center in the Office of the Department of Defense. It just brings a wealth of experience, and we're very privileged to hear your views and your thoughts on how AI is going to impact the future of war. Which is one of the topics of this class. But Jack, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you're doing well with a stint in academia there. And we really appreciate you joining us and look forward to hearing from you.
All right, thanks, Joe. Thanks very much. And Raj and to Steve Blank. I commend the three of you for taking this on. Such an important topic at such a crucial time for the Department of Defense, for the United States government. And to those students in the class, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It's just the nature of the beast that we're all living under today. I hope I'd get a chance to come out in the future and meet some of you in person. But really important topic. What I do is I'm going to dive straight in. I'm going to share two slides, and I'll stop that and get back to talking about it. And they're just sort of scene setters. And just give me 1 second to call them up. I don't know if you just see them yet. Well, they're not coming up, so I'm not going to share them right now. I'm just going to read them to you. They're simple slides, and they get to a couple of points. And here's the first thing I want to say, and I'll just read you the slides. Very simple. We have a relatively small window to transform our respective defense departments from industrial age, hardware-centric organizations to information age, software-centric, more risk-tolerant ones. That demands the right combination of tactical urgency and strategic patience. There's no question we have to move with alacrity on this right now. But there's also a danger of a hype cycle when it comes to AI. Many of you have probably heard some of the pros and cons of sort of the emerging tech environment that we're in today. There's so much that has to be done on sort of the back end. And I'm going to refer to this a couple of times, sort of the back end infrastructure architecture side of this, that there has to be a strategic patience element of this. And I live this every day in my time, both in Project Maven and also in standing up the Joint AI Center or the JAIC. And then the other thing I would just say is if, I call this the AI theory of victory for modern warfare. And if we find ourselves on the verge of a conflict with China in 20 years, the idea that we might have a fully AI-enabled force by then will not by itself guarantee victory. You're out there with former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis. He'll tell you war is a very uncertain endeavor run by humans, and you never know what's going to happen. But so the fact that we might have a fully AI-enabled force would never by itself guarantee victory. Now, if, on the other hand, in that same 20-year period, China has a fully AI-enabled force and we do not, I believe we will incur an unacceptably high risk of defeat. So that's sort of my entering argument on this. So let me just kind of get in and talk about a few different things. On my background, I'm not really going to talk much about it other than I was chartered to stand up the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, also known as Project Maven. That was under Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time, Bob Work. And algorithmic warfare brings a certain set of ideas with it, which you could spend an hour just talking about the idea of algorithm versus algorithm. Bob Work always believed the future fight will algorithm against algorithm. I also believe that. It's just algorithmic warfare, cross-functional teams, a little hard to kind of say. So we ended up becoming known as Project Maven. Because of my experience with Project Maven, and honestly, not much more than that, I was asked to and politely declined the first time to stand up the Joint AI Center. And then a guy named Jim Mattis got involved and talked to my namesake, Patrick Shanahan, who then asked me again, and I agreed that I would stand up this organization. And here's why we did it. First of all, why Maven and why the JAIC? We didn't start with an AI solution. We started with a problem. The problem was far too much information coming in from the intelligence enterprise, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. It was done very manually intensive, mind-numbing work with analysts staring at video screens for 12 hours at a shift. No matter how many energy drinks or tobacco pouches, they just could never get through that much. It was really hard for analysts to absorb that amount of data. And the data was just increasing in volume and speed and tempo and unclassified sources, top secrets. They got all these coming in simultaneously. We needed to find a solution, and we didn't have one available in the Department of Defense to really get to the automation pieces. We weren't looking to do a 1x solution, a 5x solution, or even a 10x solution. We wanted a 100x solution. We needed something that would really change the way we did processing, exploitation, and dissemination of all this intelligence coming in from all these platforms and sensors in the world. The two people that led this, Colonel Drew Kukor, Marine Corps, and his number two, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Larson, Marine Corps reservist, a Stanford-educated lawyer, and now working for a company called Anduril, got this going. And they went out and they solicited everything they could find in the Department of Defense. Tremendous kind of AI work going on in the research labs. Nothing that was available for the purposes of doing processing, exploitation, and dissemination in the near term. Where did this exist? Well, they found it pretty quickly in commercial industry. They went out and visited all the big companies at the time in Silicon Valley. They got point outs from, at the time, DIUX, In-Q-Tel, and some others. Look, this is happening. Between sort of those experiences and the Defense Innovation Board, who had been very critical of the Department of Defense for missing what was happening in commercial industry, and said, there is not only a solution to this, you sit there and you lament about how much information you're having to take in and process. Look at YouTube. Look how much information YouTube takes in every single day. Your problem's a significant problem, but it's not an overwhelming problem. There are solutions available in commercial industry. So that got us going on the path toward bringing an AI-enabled solution for the purposes of intelligence, largely computer vision, and going after sort of the intake from drones at first, tactical drones, medium altitude drones, eventually to high altitude manned airplanes, and even commercial imagery, working with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. But the whole point, and this is what then drove the stand-up of the JAIC as well, is we needed to go at scale in the Department of Defense, and we needed to go much faster. There was a revolution happening in commercial industry, and the DoD was not getting it. Raj lived this life as he stood up DIUX or took over DIUX. And this is where Eric Schmidt and the Defense Innovation Board was just pounding Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work at the time, said, you just don't get it. Bob Work knew it, but he couldn't find anybody in the department that was really being able to go after this problem at speed and at scale. So if I could say anything about Maven and JAIC, it's how do you go take technology from commercial industry, adapt it for the Department of Defense purposes, and do it fast enough and do it scaled across the entire Department of Defense. Now, that was our starting position in Maven. And then after a couple of years of doing that for Project Maven, Bob Work was itching to move just beyond intelligence. He said Maven was never designed to be only about the intelligence enterprise. We needed to bring AI into every single mission in the Department of Defense. And I personally believe, and I'll come back to this a little bit towards the end, I personally believe there is no mission in the Department of Defense that will not benefit from the introduction of AI-enabled capabilities, from the back office to the battlefield, from undersea to outer space and cyberspace and all points in between. Then it's a question of what do you go after, how soon do you go after? But it was about speed and scale. And the problem was some of the best research in the world, hands down, is happening in the military research labs. The problem was it wasn't getting across the classic technology valley of death, which I know you've heard about. I know Raj lived this life very much so, is how do you bring things over from commercial industry, get them into the department, and then begin to scale them? And the only way we could do that was start bringing those commercial technologies faster and faster. So Maven started that in the Intel enterprise. Then I was chartered to do the same thing, to stand up the DoD Joint AI Center, or the JAIC, in very typical form that Joe and Raj, and I'm sure Steve Blank would appreciate as well. Somebody signed a memo saying, go stand up a joint AI center. You don't have any people, you don't have any money, you don't have anywhere to live, but you'll figure it out. And that's what it felt like at the time. And again, I go back to what was my experience and why was I chosen? Well, 2 years of Project Maven and not much more than that, which there's a whole story unto itself to be able to talk about that. So it was about crossing the technology of valley of death and how to get better at that. I like to talk about Maven and the JAIC as AI now. And then places like DARPA and the military research labs are AI next. Now, those two worlds will start converging faster and faster over the next few years. If they don't, we're in trouble. Now, if it's not just commercial industry, it's commercial industry and the military working together. In fact, I would throw in academia right square in the middle of this, and go back to what, not to call this a halcyon days of the 50s and 60s, where it sort of this all got started with Bell Labs on the East Coast and migrated to become Silicon Valley on the West Coast. But it was this triangle of academia, industry, and government working together in new ways. And we got away from that for a lot of different reasons. You've probably talked about some. You'll probably have some others come in and tell you about Apple encryption, Snowden, and several other incidents that drove commercial tech away from DoD to some extent. I think there's a little bit of a myth, and Raj and Joe, you probably talked about this, is how much of that is really true. I lived Google and Project Maven. I could spend another class just talking about that. A lot of lessons learned on both sides. By the way, Google is very much invested back into the Department of Defense. They have some sort of boundaries on what they're going to do, but they're still working with the department. So I think there's a little bit of myth on sort of whether or not sort of commercial emerging tech industry will work with the Department of Defense. They will. Not going to be easy to sort of do it, but let me just go from there. And then in Project Maven, and became the basis for what we did in the Jake as well, is we started with a cross-functional team. In commercial tech, you call that an integrated product team. It's acquisition with software engineering, with UI, UX people that really understand how to do that. It's learning how to put things on contract fast and get things done and fielded quickly. It was whatever you could do to get away from the classic DoD stovepipe way of doing business to a much more agile software approach. And this is where people like Josh Marcuse and the DIB were very instrumental in pointing us in the right direction to sort of what those agile principles were and how we could get moving and go fast. And what would we always do? We take what I would say is sort of that very classic commercial tech approach of minimal viable product. Get something that will work good enough. Let the user know what they're going to get, as opposed to just forcing something down their throat, claim that it was much better than it really was, have them not trust it one bit, throw it out the door and never use it again. So what did we do? We turned to the special operations community, who would embrace it, as they always do. This idea is, as long as you tell me what you're giving me, and tell me what's good with it, what's bad with it, we'll take it, we'll break it, we'll tell you what needs to be fixed, and we'll be a partner with you throughout. And that was the way we started with Project Maven. We couldn't have had a better partner in the United States Special Operations Command, and they've continued to be our best partner as we stood up the Jake. But the idea of minimal viable product is very much something that Raj lives every day in his life. It's not what the Department of Defense has lived very effectively for many years. It's out there in pockets, and I'm going to come back to that, but we need to be much better at that. The other reason that we wanted to push capabilities out to the field as quickly as possible, AI-enabled capabilities, is because until users get to play around with it, it's just science fiction. They hear all these grandiose stories about what AI is, but few people are saying what AI is not. And I'll tell you right now, in the Department of Defense, it's more about what it's not than what it is. And there's so much more that we have to do to be able to get people to use those capabilities. And as soon as they touch it, they say, well, if it can do that, what about this? Every time they've said that, yes, it can be done. So we'll make this product better and better and better in a rapid sort of agile approach where, and so I'll get back to this idea of continuous integration, continuous delivery. That is the future for the Department of Defense. If we don't get that right, we're doomed, because AI capabilities left by themselves 6 months down the road will become useless. Just like any commercial software, it's got to be a continuous development cycle. So that idea of MVP, putting capabilities in the user's hand, letting them tearing apart, letting them tell us what would work, what didn't work, what they'd like to see better, was really sort of the core concept about Maven, and then became the Jake. Also, we had 3 combat theaters that were going on with special operations forces, and then sort of more traditional forces as we move beyond SOF. In Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, and then Iraq, of course, and a little bit of Syria as well. So we could put these capabilities out in the field very rapidly and really wring them out. And we had lots of lessons learned from those earliest days of Project Maven. People do get a little bit surprised that within 4 months of standing up Project Maven, we were on contract with 4 startup companies, and then a month later with Google. I mean, Google on contract with the Department of Defense. Nobody thought we would ever do that. great story all by itself. Now with a little bit of a twist at the end, it wasn't such a great story when they sort of didn't renew their contract with Maven. But we were on contract with them and putting capabilities 3 months beyond that out in the field in combat situations where we learned so much. It's the other thing about AI. You train it against one set of data that will reflect to some extent the real world, but once you put it in the real world, you learn it never works as advertised. So you need this cycle of continuous integration, continuous development. And then of course you need a classic disruptor. Raj was the disruptor when he did DIUX, but in this case, a Marine Corps Colonel, Colonel Drew Kukor, he is a classic disruptor, right? Somebody who does not take no for an answer, and he breaks a little glass, makes some people a little bit upset in terms of upturning their rice bowls and apple carts and whatever other cliches I could use, but you need someone like that. But when you have a disruptor like that, the role I needed to play was to have top cover for the disruptor. This combination of sort of this top-down advocacy and pressure and this sort of bottom-up innovation. And then you bring in a disruptor that gets this thing going. And you just have to have somebody like that that will never do anything but keep moving forward, because there are so many obstacles in the Department of Defense that it would be easy to become disillusioned and just give up on the whole enterprise. And Drew would never do that. He took so many beatings and scars along the way. But what he did is he set the path for us and Jake to get going and begin to scale well beyond intelligence enterprise to do everything else what we were doing as we stood up to Jake. So Maven was a good start, but it was also insufficient. This is a really important point. It's the same issues. This is what Raj lived with DIUX. It's what AFWorks has had to deal with. It's what Hondo Gertz had to deal with when he was down running SoftWorks. It's what Colonel Enrique Oti has done up at Kessel Run. And I could go on and on. Chris Lynch at Defense Digital Service. These are people that came in and were classic disruptors. They were strong personalities running innovation organizations in innovative ways. But now you had to take all of those models and begin to learn how do you scale them across the Department of Defense. That is so incredibly hard. And that's what the Jake was designed to do. And you know, you spark the movement. Raj is responsible for sparking the next decade, 15, 20 years, forever of movement. But unless you take those models and begin to scale them across the department, they're still sitting there as sort of one-off organizations. They're critical, but they're insufficient. I guess that would be my biggest point. This is going to be a statement that some people might cringe a little bit at. Some will say, I don't think it's an oxymoron. You can't get away with this phrase. What I say is you need to inculcate a startup culture in the institutional bureaucracy of the Department of Defense. Is that possible? I think it is. I think you need the right people to do it. And I don't think it happens overnight. Back to my tactical urgency, strategic patience phrase. You know, Drew Kukor is the tactical urgency person. I was, okay, now how do we make the Department of Defense begin to change and incorporate all those principles into its very fabric? You know, we have a choice, do it or die. I mean, that's how simple it is to me, that we don't have a long way to go before we realize it's get on board this very rapidly moving emerging tech train, or be put or shunted off to the side. So we also moved, Maven was about technology. It was about getting technology with AI capabilities fielded. The Jake is about technology and everything else that has to go into doing this. So it's everything from how do you use AI ethically, to what does acquisition and contracting best practices look like for AI? What does strategic engagement look like? What does international engagement look like? What is, and this is one of the most important things we were working on in the Jake, is this thing called the Joint Common Foundation. It is this architecture and infrastructure, call it, for lack of really a cleaner term, a platform as a service, a DevSecOps or AI ops environment on top of an enterprise cloud environment that's supposed to be called JEDI. If you've heard the 4 letters called JEDI, it's a little bit of a thrash going on legally there, but just say there are options available right now that the Jake is working with to build this DevSecOps AI ops environment, which is to give everybody in the Department of Defense equal access to everything from data to AI tools, to all the security environment, to Jupyter notebooks, you name it. Everything you would need to develop AI, the Jake is building that as a common foundation. As much as I loved my Maven team, even today they're having a hard time getting Maven products out to anybody else in the Department of Defense. still too much sort of lost in the island of Maven. The Joint Common Foundation is designed to make that available to everybody across the Department of Defense. And I think over the next few years, that JCF, or Joint Common Foundation, will be what the JAIC becomes known for, as much or more than anything else that it's doing. Because until it get beyond, the services will figure out the technology piece of it. I don't have really any doubt of that whatsoever. It's just they need a little bit of a push. That flywheel has to get turning a little bit faster. So the JAIC's kind of taking on the technology piece of it. But over time, they're going to get better and better at that. And the JAIC will focus on how do we get the AI policies in place? What Joe lived this in OSD policy. What does it take to actually do this? How do we use AI? How do we work with the UK and our other Five Eye partners? How do we work with the European Union? Those are all things that JAIC should come and work on. So the idea of a centralized direction with decentralized development, experimentation, and use, so important to me in the Department of Defense. That's how you begin to spread the culture across the department. I wouldn't pretend to tell the services how to cook their eggs, right? They know how to do the innovation. What I think is really important is we give them the infrastructure and the back-end architecture to succeed. All those things have to be put in place. Everything the JAIC should be doing should become a product. And this is where it became most apparent to me, is when I'll say probably the most important hire I made in my time at the JAIC was a chief technology officer, Nan Molchandani. Nan came from Silicon Valley, 26 plus years in industry, where he owned companies, sold companies, bought companies, CEO companies. He came in with a completely different look. Raj would say, well, yeah, that's just the culture of Silicon Valley. It's what we've always wanted in the Department of Defense. But the day he came in the door, he changed the culture of the organization. Everything from focusing on product development, product management, not project management, right? It's a big, big distinction. People like Nick Sinai, if Nick's ever going to talk to the class, this idea of what does product development look like? This idea of minimal viable product is just one part of it. This idea of UI, UX, user interface, user experience, sort of a ruthless focus on user experience. So DoD has never been very good at that. How can I sit people side by side with the developers of the software and get instant feedback on what's working and what's not working? So Nan came in and kind of put that right focus. And he also began to get us thinking much more about this concept of leverage, right? Even as 200 people in the JAIC, and that includes contractors right now, and it probably is not going to get a whole lot bigger than that. 200 people will not change the entire Department of Defense and their AI way of doing business. What it has to do is leverage. The idea of everything that JAIC does is a product available to everybody else in the Department of Defense. They come, pull it off the shelf, so to speak. And you use that to leverage the entire Department of Defense. Otherwise, JAIC will be an interesting organization that lasts for a few years and goes away. Now, I still think the JAIC should have the mindset of 7 to 10 years from now, it does go away. Because just like electricity, the department just gets it and figures it out. But until then, the idea of centralized direction, minimal viable product, UI, UX, ruthless focus on customer experience are all things that Nan brought into us. And I think it's so important. The idea of integrated product teams. Yeah, we called them cross-functional teams over in Maven, but they're really integrated product teams. It's all parts of the JAIC working simultaneously. And we showed really good example of this when COVID hit, and we worked with Northern Command and also the National Guard. Side by side, we had the person that was our ethics lead saying, well, I don't know, if you develop that sort of capability, there is a problem potentially with privacy, so we ought to take that into account. The T&E side of it is, hey, has anybody actually put this through the ringer? Is it going to work as advertising? All those aspects of developing, fielding, testing, and updating AI are so important. And then again, I said this earlier, but I'll come back to this idea of continuous integration, continuous delivery, that if you do not update these things, like the goal should be hourly, but we were proud in Maven for the first updates on our initial algorithms. We're out the door in 4 to 5 months. Got better and better and better. I think they're down to, I hope in some cases, about every 2 weeks. I think in our personal lives, we get updates pushed to us, hourly in some of our apps. So that's the goal. That's the vision we all have to have. So that we're not there, we're not even close to there. But to be able to do that, you need this back-end infrastructure and architecture so that a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Space Force, wherever they are, can design an app on the spot, relying on this back-end infrastructure in the Joint Common Foundation. That's a great vision to have. We're not close to doing that yet, with some very limited exceptions, like Kessel Run, which is not AI, although they're starting to go down that path too. But they're getting into that model of how quickly can I get this in an agile sort of software pathway of doing things and push it out to the field as quickly as possible. So this concept of leverage and UI, UX, and all that is so essential to everything we're doing. And the back end requires things in addition to a common foundation, a data management platform, open APIs, all the T&E tools. Everything should be available to everybody in the Department of Defense. It may not all live in the Jake. It may just be accessible via the Jake. And the Jake, when I left the scene, was partnering with the Air Force, because the Microsoft Enterprise Cloud solution called JEDI had not yet gone through the courts. It's still sort of in litigation. So using the United States Air Force's Platform One and Cloud One as an enterprise cloud as a service. Just 3 years of doing Maven and a little bit more in Jake. The operators of, we developed the capabilities, AI capabilities in Maven for the Intel analysts. The most interesting dynamic to me was the operators in the soft world were becoming the more innovative users of the capabilities. Why? They didn't have a lot of bad habit patterns to fall back on. They didn't start with the premises, my job's going away, so why would I trust this? Well, first, your job's not going away. Two, trust is the crucial word, and we need you to trust it. But the other operator said, I don't care what it looks like, give it to me, and boy, I'll make that thing sing. And they did over and over and over again. So it's a really interesting dynamic that the people most innovative in these new capabilities were those with no experience on the Intel side, at least on the Maven piece of it. So we're getting faster and faster and doing better at that. Now, what's good enough when we field these capabilities? It was never for us to say what was good enough. It was for the users of the capabilities to tell us that answer. We would give some parameters, like this is a 95% test and evaluation solution. Do you accept it? I don't know. Let me try it out. Well, first time you used it in Afghanistan, you never trained it against data that had women wearing full-length black burqas. It didn't know what those were. Interesting little problem. So you get real world data, you feed it back into the algorithm, and it performs better and better second, third time, so on and so on. So it was all about the user defining what success looked like, never what we were trying to say what was right or what was not perfect or a good enough for you. That was up to them. So the idea of ops and intel working closer and closer together, those two worlds coming and merging, we've always talked about this, sort of that holy grail idea of ops intel fusion. These AI enabled capabilities are getting us closer and closer to that environment. I'm very confident that we'll get better and better at doing this. And then this idea of user defined operating picture, it's with us today. I think it's just going to get even more the performance of that will increase, I think, exponentially over the next couple of years, because you will have the ability to sort of do this software on the fly, so to speak, and then it will make things like, they keep adding letters to the acronym of JADC2, but CJADC2, Joint All Domain Command and Control, and combined and joint and so on. So there's a lot going on in that area. I'll leave that for a different time. So for the warfighter's role, the biggest role that the warfighters have in this is to be very demanding customers and to say what needs to be fixed, and not just accept what we've done to operators too many times in my career, which is, look, here's the product, take it or leave it. We're going to get you another version 5 years from now, and probably $200 million over budget. That world is gone. It's just gone, right? We have got to get to that point where here it is. What's wrong with it? We'll fix it as quickly as we can, and we'll update it with real world data, and we'll make it better and better. So demanding customers and provide ruthlessly candid feedback, which was never a problem with the special operations community, never a problem whatsoever. But I say even more important than this is the idea of develop new operating concepts. Operating concepts do not come out of the Pentagon. Pentagon writes great doctrines, all sorts of instructions and directives and great PowerPoint slides. The operating concepts will come from those on the tactical edge or the operational sort of environment. And what does a world of which AI, enterprise cloud, 5G, and someday quantum look like? I don't know, but it's not for us to say, it's for the users to be able to figure it out by letting them try it out in sort of operational settings. What this brings into me is we've always kind of had this emphasis, but even more than ever before is an emphasis on modeling and simulation, live virtual constructive environments. wargaming, and probably as important as anything else, which General Selva, the previous vice chairman, would talk about, and the current vice chairman, General John Hyten, always talks about, is the idea of experimentation of wargaming. We've got to wring these concepts out. Right now, they're still what we call white cards, right? Somebody says, well, I think in 10 years, China's going to have this, we're going to have this. It's all science fiction. Now we need people who actually know something about technology to put some sort of bounds on what it could look like in that 15 or 20-year environment, and war game that, experiment that, and do modeling and simulation against that. So I think that's the next big role. And Nan Mulchandani, as the JAIC CTO, is really trying to put a lot of effort into starting to think what that environment should look like, which is as much about how do you fix software for the Department of Defense beyond just, how do we get AI right for the Department of Defense? And a lot of what if scenarios. What if we took this capability and did it differently? Technology over and over again shows that what you delivered and how it's used are two very different things. Your idea of an operating concept and the user's idea of an operating concept are never the same, which is what I love about just pushing capabilities out and let the operators figure it out.
Hey,
so
Jack,
how do we, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just think this is such an important and good point of using experimentation to delve into what operational concepts may be, what the art of possible is, that is much more grounded in reality rather than just some academic views. Could you perhaps share a couple of examples or areas where you think the greatest change in operational concepts will be, and what the type of experimentation we need?
Yeah, so let me go back to sort of a previous role I had as an Air Force colonel. One of the organizations that fell under me was an organization that ran something called Virtual Flag. You've heard of Red Flag, which is a big exercise the Air Force hosts out in the ranges in Nevada. Virtual Flag was bringing live virtual constructive environments together. So you had real airplanes out there doing what they were doing. You had sort of a virtual environment, which was somebody in a simulator flying with real airplanes, flying live, and then constructive, which is sort of think sitting on a keyboard in a constructive environment. That allowed people to sort of test against very high-end, including compartmented, classified capabilities that you couldn't just go out and do in the real world. The idea of having live, virtual, and constructive together allowed you to do so much more than you could ever do on the ranges of Nevada for a dozen different reasons. That environment exists today. Well, you need more and more of that to start trying these new operating concepts. I know the Air Force with ABMS, the Advanced Battle Management System, and this thing called JADC2, have been doing some of those experiments out in places like Nellis Air Force Base in their operations center, down in the coast of Florida, the Army with Project Convergence, the Navy with Clutch Shot. There are several of these sort of joint warfighting ideas out there. And the Joint Staff J7 right now is chartered to write the joint warfighting concept for 2030. I think they're going to deliver it here in 3 months by the end of the year. I'm not sure how well that joint concept is informed by some of these emerging technology capabilities, because the people writing the concepts don't quite understand enough about them yet. And the people that are developing the capabilities aren't writing operating concepts. So I think it's really important, Raj, to what you're getting at is you put these people in an environment together. Oh, that's what we're talking about. I tell you, it's like a light bulb moment. And unfortunately, I'm going to be very candid here. The light bulb moment for a lot of people when seeing Project Maven's initial algorithms is, that's it? Which is a classic history approach, right? You sort of, the initial technology is worse than the technology it's replacing, but you're on a sigmoid curve, the S curve. And then at some point, you just rapidly go up and things begin to change very quickly. But how do you know that unless you go out and play them? So when the JAIC's kind of big emphasis as I left the scene and over the next couple of years with General Mike Groen, Marine Corps 3-star now running the JAIC, will be on joint warfighting operations. What we were looking to do is take a lot of these joint all-domain command and control ideas from the services, all of which were very interesting, but were not very well connected with each other. And they had no AI-enabled capabilities, with a couple of exceptions here and there. How do we stitch those seams together with these AI capabilities? And what we were finding very quickly as well, we see a little bit of what the Air Force is doing. Army, did you know the Air Force was doing that? No, we did not. Well, Army, Air Force, let me introduce the two of you. And I'm a little tongue in cheek on this, but that's what this environment is all about. Getting people in the room, seeing what these capabilities can do. And I was involved in a previous job in the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, even before my Maven time, going and seeing this happen in some exercises in places like Korea and Hawaii, where you had a combination of live things happening in the United States, a little bit overseas, but also this virtual and constructive environment where you could see some of these tech companies would bring in. I say tech companies, in this case, it could be the research labs because it might have been a low technology readiness level, but throw it out there and see what it can do. Ah, that is incredible. Now, it's got some severe limitations. How do we remove those limitations? How do we make this thing more suitable for an operational environment? All right, let's go from there. So I think, Rise, that the key is you put the technologists and operators together. If I were to emphasize one thing today, in addition to all the things I've already said, it's operators and technologists closer together. People say, Henry Kissinger, what's he got to do with emerging technology? If you read Kissinger's Atlantic article from 2018, How the Enlightenment Ends, it's a very dystopian view of the future of AI, more so than I actually would ever accept. However, kind of buried in Kissinger's very, very sophisticated way of writing is this idea of the people building the technology need to know what that technology is going to be used for. The people using technology need a much better understanding of what the technology can and cannot do. In Department of Defense terms, to me, that means operators and technologists working very closely together and sort of breaking down the remaining stigmas or barriers about, well, we don't want to work with the Department of Defense because we think they're going to use AI for harm. Wouldn't you want to work with the Department of Defense to ensure they don't use it for the wrong purposes, as opposed to standing out from the outside and saying, we don't believe you and we don't trust you? Come with us, help us, be side by side. So having that sort of op and tech team side by side, in some cases, literally side by side, and some virtually side by side, talking a space environment, working in a space operations center, and then being able to have those people that are sort of designing future operating concepts all together in understanding what that future environment needs to look like. I think that's probably, you're hitting on it, Rod. You keyed in, and probably the thing that I would underline more than anything else is getting out of the theory phase and into the what can it really do. And we're in a little bit of a plateau right now. There is a hype curve associated with AI. I think it was oversold. There is not an AI winter coming. It's gone. That will never come back. I never say never, but in this case, I'm on tape saying it, and I'm going to stand by it. I think in this case, it may take a little bit while to really start to go up the slope of that S curve, but that slope is there. And the only reason we're going to get there up faster is by putting these capabilities in the hands of users and figuring out how to do it. So I don't want to spend a lot more time than that, but let me just end with a couple of things. First of all, I do believe right now we're talking about human-machine teaming. There will be ways where these capabilities will replace people. And they're in the standard sort of categories, the sort of ontology of dangerous, dumb, monotonous, mundane, sort of driving vehicles slowly may be replaced with the automated capability. When it comes down to cognition, humans making decisions about war fighting and taking lives and protecting lives, that's where it's human machine working together. I thought Gary Kasparov got this exactly right, well before I knew what right looked like, when I read Deep Thinking as I had embarked on the Maven journey. That to me was the beginning of a story of, it's not humans or machines, it's human machines working together. That's the environment we're talking about, which is why operators and technologists need to be together to really understand how this stuff's gonna work together. And then there are questions about return on investment. I suffered from a lot of hard questions from internal to the Department of Defense about, you're spending a lot of money, what are you getting for it yet? And also from the Hill, to be honest with you, saying, I want to know what you're going to spend your money on in 2024. I said, not really publicly, and probably not to anybody's face other than a staffer, if you think I can tell you exactly what we're buying in this technology in 2024, I should be fired on the spot because I'm lying to you. I can tell you maybe 6 months from now what we're going to do. Beyond that, just hold me accountable for delivery. Don't hold me accountable for exactly what I'm spending my money on. That as Raj knows, is not the way the Department of Defense is used to doing business. And then I'll just end with some of the missions that Jake was taking on. We started with what I would call lower risk, lower consequence missions, like predictive maintenance for H-60 helicopters, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Turned out to be a really interesting work that's very applicable right now in the real world. California wildfires, hurricanes. How do you see where the wildfire line is moving? How do you assess flooding damage after a hurricane? Those are all very good applications. Warfighter health is a big one, looking at medical imagery, cancer diagnosis. I mean, there's a lot going on with DIU right now on that very subject. Incredible amount of data in the Joint Pathology Center that needs to be digitized. And guess what's in that data? Previous COVID samples. Imagine if we could get those digitized, get our way through them with AI-enabled capabilities, and develop vaccines well before the next kind of coronavirus hits. Really interesting work. This warfighting ops is really kind of everything. So what we called it smart sensor, which is AI at the edge. It's the next big thing as far as I'm concerned for the Department of Defense. A lot of this is going on the sort of the back end infrastructure side, but now tactical development of AI enabled capabilities getting very rapidly. So putting AI enabled capabilities on platforms and sensors. So size, weight, and power is now getting to the point where you can do that and do it very effectively over the next couple of years. So warfighting operations, kind of that big umbrella one, back to what Raj was asking about, and I talked about JADC2 and some other things. Target development, ground-based surveillance, UASs, manned airplanes, swarming drones. I actually do believe swarming drones will be one of the biggest developments of the next decade, because swarming drones are one thing, but then AI-enabled swarming drones that are actually communicating with each other and making decisions. Absolutely fascinating subject. I think we take on. We did a little bit on wargaming. Tomas Sandholm, the person that sort of figured out how to use some AI capabilities for Texas Hold'em poker, a game of imperfect information. We had him doing a little work about game theoretic competition. That, again, to me is intriguing. Don't know if it's going to produce in the near term, but I'd rather throw some money at these grand kind of bold ideas and see what produces rather than just sit back and wait for technology to reach out to us. So, I said at the beginning, I'll go back to it. I think every DoD mission will be affected by AI. The question is, how quickly can you do it? You have to get the foundational elements right. Tactical urgency, strategic patience. Build that back-end infrastructure and architecture. Spend some time getting that right, and then the rest will begin to happen faster and faster. So I think, I say this as sort of a closing. Time has always been a key dimension of warfare. I think it will become the critical dimension because of AI-enabled capabilities and 5G and quantum and some other things. You're going to have advantages, but they're going to be fleeting advantages. And as I tweeted this morning, as a matter of fact, in response to somebody else, I said, the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, gets a little bit overused, but I know enough about John Boyd to say I'm comfortable in asserting that the second O, the orient part, is going to be the most important O out of those 4 letters in the future, and for better or worse, because AI-enabled capabilities will allow you to observe very quickly, decide and act very quickly should you choose to. So how you observe and what you observe is really important in terms of orientation. You can be less misled with fake news, information, corruption, things like that. So you've got to get smarter about how we actually do it, but these temporal dimensions are going to be so important. We're gone from the days of supremacy or dominance. It's about fleeting advantage and taking advantage of those fleeting advantages. And then if you talk to Secretary Mattis, or he is going to talk to you, you might probe him a little bit. He was on record as saying he was beginning to think that AI might affect the very nature of war. Now, I disagree with that, but it comes down to definitions. And Frank Hoffman, who kind of was working with Secretary Mattis on this at the National Defense University, depends how you define it. Frank was more about how you decide when you want to fight and how you want to fight. I just kept reverting back to sort of classic Thucydides, fear, culture, honor, interest, why we choose to fight. If you get over the definition interest, I think we're probably in the same place. It's not going to change the immutable nature of war, but it will definitely change the character of warfare forever and ever, and which is why we have to do it today. So I know I kind of, it's a lot out there in the time, but I'll open it for any final questions, or I'm good with more time if you are.
Jack, that was just extraordinary. We just couldn't have had a more compelling introduction to the topic and really to the broader challenges that the DoD is facing as we prepare for the many challenges and opportunities that we're going to face in future conflict. Um, we have some student questions submitted, but you really hit them all and then some. So I think we will just let the students take this all in, and it's just really set us up for these lessons and then some.
And you know, Joe, if I could, you know, a lot of people want to ask about ethics,
Yeah.
and I would take a little bit of criticism from some people that used to be in the department about the time we were spending on ethics. But I'll tell you, there's no important subject to me because it communicates to industry and academia that we are serious about it. I would never not say, look, we're going to use AI capabilities for weapons, right? Some point they will become AI-enabled autonomous weapon systems. However, in developing those capabilities and fielding, we will be very disciplined and rigorous, like we do in every capability in Department of Defense. But we put ethics front and center. I hired somebody to run my ethics division of the J. Very important. People do want to hear that over and over again. But it doesn't mean we're not going to do it. It won't slow us down. This is where we probably end up in a little bit of a standoff with some people in commercial tech who say, I'm still not comfortable with what DOD doing. Again, I go back to what I said earlier. Come help us. Come help us. Better off than seeing what bad things might happen if you don't help us.
No, and that's a critical topic we're going to cover later in the course. And you've been generous already, but maybe we'll reach out again for some additional thoughts on the ethics topic. But Raj, subject to you, I was just going to thank Jack. Thank you for all the contributions throughout your career. Raj and I both had a chance to have a ringside seat to some of your recent assignments. Done a lot of great work, but I think your work with the JAIC, it's going to have impact for decades to come. And that on behalf of our entire class, just want to thank you for all you've done for all of us, and thank you for joining and sharing your really extraordinary insights with us on these important topics.
Yeah, I think it's also important to know when it's time to leave. I knew I was good at starting the organization. I wouldn't say I was the best person to get it to the next level. I think that's part of the honesty that comes with leadership, is knowing when it's time to bring in the right person at the right time. I'm good at standing up organizations. I would never claim I'm an innovator ever. Right? I know my limitations, as Clint Eastwood would say. And so the important part is it got going, right? There's some part of it is rip the Band-Aid off and just go. Now start bringing in the right people, the nuns, and he brought somebody in that he knew up at Harvard. That's a PhD in computer science. That will build and build and build. Raj has lived this life. Raj, everything I've said today, I think Raj is going, yep, been there, done that, but I did it 2 years before you.
Well, Jack, I want to thank you too for all the amazing work you've done, and leaving at the right time I think is key. And so I had to do the same. But seriously though, what you did at the JAIC and what it continues to do is remarkable, right? Because it's going, as you said at the beginning, from interesting little experiments and innovation pockets to actually scaling across the department. That is a much harder task than some of the earlier stuff that many of us did. So I just do want to thank you for all that you've done and really the multi-decade impact of what you started is going to make. So I'm sure this is not the last time that we'll have time to interact in the DoD context or in the Stanford context.
And I'll say with Raj and people like Chris Lynch, they're like great athletes. They make it look a lot easier than it really is. Chris Lynch would walk around the building with a hoodie and his red sneakers and make it look like, oh, so easy and the counterculture and all that. He knew the pain of doing it. But the beauty is he never let it get to him, and you never see it with him. So it's like Michael Jordan. I mean, nobody understood how much Michael Jordan really practiced to get it right. So Raj and Chris and Enrique and a bunch of others made it look a lot easier, but they know how hard it was. They were true pioneers and pathfinders. So Raj, you were one of those pathfinders and pioneers, and without you, there is no Maven. Without Maven, there's no Jake. Without Jake, and go on and on and on. Somebody has to get it going. So I owe thanks back to you.
Jack, I just remember seeing you at the toughest days of standing to Jake, and you made it look ezy too. So I never.
It wasn't. Oh, it wasn't.
Saw you sweat. You were cut of the same cloth, and
that's why they invented bourbon. Huh?
We took inspiration.
Come on back out to Silicon Valley.
You got a lot more weight you could throw around the building. Which was,
if you like to start things, come on back out to Silicon Valley and Stanford when you finish up with school.
Deal. Love it. Love to do it.
Yeah. Lynch is actually joining us on Thursday, Jack. Thursday.
Oh, is he? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's Chris and Hand. Actually, both of them together are going to do the Thursday.
Oh, God, it's great. It's just people get just energized listening to him. It's just hard work. And then he left that to go do his own startup. Again, not easy.
Jack, I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll just have a second.
Okay.